Homeschooling. What pops into your head when you hear that word? Well, on social media, I recently mentioned that we homeschooled our children. So you can imagine some of the comments that I heard that revealed a lot of the myths about homeschooling. And I addressed some of them, but I'm going to go ahead and share a conversation that I had with my wife, since she did most of our homeschooling, to dispel some of those myths today. I'm Larry Cornett, and this is Invincible Life. So I'd mentioned that I'd had kind of some interaction online on social media about homeschooling, and I responded to some of those folks. I left some comments to share our experiences with it. There's just so many myths about homeschooling, and normally I don't speak up or say anything about it, but like many things that irritate me, I finally decided to record a podcast about it. So maybe you are a young parent and you're struggling with decisions about your own children's future education, or you're a parent who's already discovered that the educational system is failing your child for one reason or another. There's a lot of reasons that happens. Or you're a grandparent and you're concerned about your grandchild's education. So it could be a lot of these different reasons, and you could be at a different place in your life. So I want to clear up a few of the myths, and I brought my wife in to talk on the podcast because she's the one who actually did 99.9% of the homeschooling when we homeschooled our children in various capacities. So welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of dive into a few of these myths, because this is the stuff that comes up every time someone hears that we homeschooled. Like I said, I don't talk about it a lot, but occasionally it comes up, and it's either to correct somebody who's spouting some nonsense, or talking about what a great experience it actually was for us, and how I think that created a really close bond between us and our kids. So one that comes up is kind of a misunderstanding, is that people only homeschool for religious reasons. So they disagree with what's being taught in public schools. They have a very strong kind of religious background, and they want to be able to manage what their kids are learning, and they're worried about that.
It's very protectionist.
Yeah.
Trying to keep things from kids rather than to expose them to more, which I believe is what we were doing through homeschooling.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I feel like that's exactly what we were doing, is trying to broaden what our kids were exposed to. And, obviously through the lens of their children. And so there's only some stuff you're going to expose them to and not other stuff. But, and I don't think any of the people that were in your homeschool group were doing it really for religious reasons, from what I understand.
No, there are homeschooling groups and communities. And so if you are doing it for religious reasons, you can easily find a group that focuses on that. And if you are doing it for other reasons, you can find a group that focuses on that. I mean, it's just choosing your community.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we were living in Silicon Valley at the time. So a lot of the folks that were part of our homeschool community, and we're going to get into this, I think, a little bit too, is you can't have a community. You don't have to do this all alone. It's not an isolationist kind of thing. A lot of the folks were highly educated, and a lot of them worked in tech, or their spouse worked in tech. So it was a really interesting group of really smart people that were doing this for reasons that were not because of wanting to shield their kids from things, but trying to improve the quality of education. And maybe you could talk a little bit about why we did it. Since it wasn't for religious reasons, why did we do this? Why didn't we just dump our kids in public school?
Sure. I mean, I was aware of homeschooling before our kids were of school age, because my mother decided to homeschool my younger siblings. I was not homeschooled, but she was trying it with my younger siblings and was really happy about it. So I heard her talking about it. I wasn't really sold on the idea. I believed some of the myths that we are talking about today, that there would be something wrong with them, or that they wouldn't be socialized. I mean, all the things that people say. But then when our oldest child was nearing 5 years old, and people that we were interacting with were talking about signing their kids up for kindergarten, we sat down and we were looking at what she was doing. She knew all of the things that they would be teaching in kindergarten. She was starting to read. She was writing. And we thought that she might get bored if she went to kindergarten. And she was so excited about learning.
Yeah.
So excited, and just desperate to practice her writing, and excited to learn to read. And I was really worried that if we put her in a classroom and she was forced to slow down,
Right.
because, I mean, it's nothing that's the teacher's fault, but when you have a large group, you have to do whatever works for the large portion of that group, and you can't focus on outliers. And so I worried that she would lose that excitement. And so I thought, well, I guess we'll give this homeschooling thing a try, see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I think both of us had experienced some of that in our own education, that, they're teaching to a classroom. And in my case, it wasn't a massive class. It was like 26 people, but still the teacher was teaching to the kind of median, and trying to help the kids who were falling behind. And I remember being a junior in high school, and we had a couple of kids in class that couldn't read. And so the teacher always had to slow things down, because we had kids that were juniors in high school that couldn't read. And I remember sitting in a class, and the way the teacher taught this class is we would go around and each kid would read a page from the textbook. You'd read a page, and the kid behind you'd read a page, and the kid behind them would read a page. That was how I got educated in that class. I mean, come on. It was such a waste of my time. I was bored. I did really well in school, but I was bored. And I had to join a program where it was kind of trying to help us get a little more advanced education, because there were about 5 or 6 of us that were just way beyond what was happening in the classroom. And it's like, what a shame to have kids that want to learn, that are able to go faster and to do really well, and they're being held back. They're being held back. And sometimes there's stuff that is just really negative about the school experience. And then, a couple of our kids had some pretty negative experiences with school, just bullying, and stuff like that had happened. So it's like, yeah, this really isn't a great experience. You touched on something that you mentioned it briefly, is the second myth that comes up all the time. Very popular myth is that if you homeschool kids, they're going to miss all that valuable socialization. They're not getting socialized.
Sure. I mean, people would come up to me in the store, because we would be out during the day. This is when our kids were small. We would be out during the day, at the grocery store or whatever, and I have a pack of kids with me, and they would ask, why aren't they in school? And then I'd say that we homeschool, and they would say, aren't you worried about socialization? I mean, that is the top question that people get when others find out that they homeschool. And the answer is no. I'm not worried about socialization. the socialization that happens in a classroom is very artificial.
Oh, it's totally fake. Yeah.
The idea of that people should only interact with people who are their same age
Right.
within
Right.
like a 1 year, maybe 2 year window is very artificial and does not help prepare them for their life beyond school.
Right.
And a lot of times, classrooms and schools have very negative socialization. I mean, like
Sure.
you talked about before, like bullying and peer pressure. Yes, it is. They are being socialized, but it is not something positive. And I believe that at least the way that we homeschooled, our kids got very positive socialization with people, both children and adults, of a wide range of ages.
Right. Yeah.
And so through that, they became very comfortable interacting with all different kinds of people, which I think serves them well to this day.
Right. Yeah. I still remember the story you told me. So speaking of socialization, we were part of a community, and my wife would go and hang out with these parents and their kids, and they would be doing things together, extracurricular stuff together, going to the beach, going to a class together. And you mentioned there was a time they all were at the park playing. And there was this kid that, had some type of disability, I remember. And our kids, the homeschool kids, invited them to play with them and were really welcoming and friendly and nice. And the lady came up and said, "I've never had kids behave like this before. Can you tell me, who are you people? Why are your kids being so nice to my kid?"
Well, we're all a little weird. That's and I mean that in the best possible way.
Yeah, it's a good way. That is true. And that is something that's interesting too, is I've noticed, is that different kids need different types of education, different ways to be taught.
Absolutely.
Some people respond really well to physicality, and being able to kind of walk and talk and be educated. And others need a certain type of learning if they need more visual, more auditory, more whatever, hands-on, physical kind of stuff. Some kids get pretty hyper. I mean, we've been talking about the rise of ADHD with kids. And a lot of that, I mean, I think back on being a young boy, and you're sitting in a desk for 8 hours a day in this classroom, looking out the window, and maybe you get a recess break and maybe you walk between classes, but most of the time you're just sitting in a desk trying to pay attention and be still, and you're bored and you're restless, and you get punished for that. You get punished for it. The kids who are like fidgeting in their seat and they can't, just sit there and stare at a chalkboard or a whiteboard, they get punished for it. Whereas with homeschooling, you can adapt, and you can tell when somebody needs a break, and it's like, hey, let's go play for a little bit. Let's take a walk. Let's go somewhere, and then we'll start doing this again when we get back. And it was really amazing for our kids.
Yeah, you mentioned something about different learning styles. And I think that is one of the fantastic aspects of homeschooling, is that you can tailor learning to each individual child's learning style. And again, this is not a fault of teachers at all, but it is absolutely impossible for them to do that when they have a class, even if it's a small class.
Yeah.
And most of them don't have small classes. And so even if they know that one of the children does better with auditory learning and another better with written learning, they can't do anything about it. They can switch it up, but they really can't focus to make sure that each child gets what they need. They just can't.
Right. And then there's another myth that homeschooling is an all or nothing proposition, that if you're homeschooling, it's 100% homeschooling, 100% you teaching, and that's it. You got to figure it all out yourself, and there's nothing you can do outside of your home.
And I think people get intimidated by that thought.
Sure, yeah.
That's a lot of responsibility.
But I know that you and the other homeschool parents, that we had times that you put money together to hire an educator, to hire somebody to teach a specific class. We would take the kids to take classes. They did Aikido, they did soccer, they did all kinds of stuff.
Well, I think specifically a time that we hired someone was an art teacher, because there were some things, for instance, as a former English teacher, I did things like book club for our homeschoolers, or I could teach a small writing class for other kids and our kids. But I can't draw or paint or sculpt to save my life. And I know that about myself. But that was something that our children wanted to learn and that we thought would be helpful for them. So I asked around, anybody else interested? We found an art teacher. He came to our house weekly. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And they learned things that I could not teach them.
And I think we also did a really good mix of, there was the homeschool courses, there were the classes we were taking outside the classroom, but our kids also took classes at community colleges. And that made a huge difference. One of the wonderful things about that is they were able to get college credit for these courses they were taking, and then go into the university. We could talk about this later, but go into the university and already have almost a year out of the way. And so...
And a couple times it was 2 years, actually.
So like 2 of our kids graduated early from college because they had so much out of the way that they're like, okay, I'm done in 3 years, which was massively beneficial, both in terms of time, but financially too. People are talking about the expense of college. So it's really flexible in terms of what you do.
Well, I think that's also goes back and is related to what you said about homeschooling being all or nothing. So yes, the idea that it doesn't have to be that you do everything in your home by yourself, that you can get help from other places. But the other thing is, you can change year to year or even semester to semester whether or not you are homeschooling your child or taking advantage of some kind of public education. You could start homeschooling and homeschool, kindergarten through, say, 8th grade, and then want to send your kids to a traditional high school, or maybe you want to send your child or children to a charter school.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's not like you are locked in, that you decide at, 5 years old, okay, this is what we're going to do, and
stuck.
we'll do it come hell or high water. It really is about trying to do what is best for your child or children. And you or at least we did, reevaluated that constantly.
Right.
Is this the best place for them? If not, what would be better? And how can we make that happen? And I have experience homeschooling all the way through high school, through 10th grade, through 8th grade. I mean, I've done all different variations of that. And, you just need to figure out what's the best.
Yeah. And I think it can feel overwhelming. You have a background as a teacher. So Nicole taught high school and had some experience with that. So people are like, oh, okay, your wife taught high school, so that's why you guys could do it. But many of the people in the homeschool group were not former educators or teachers.
Well, but I can also say that me being a former teacher, was not necessarily helpful for me being a homeschool teacher. The biggest thing that educators in the either public or private school system have to work on, and the majority of their time is spent with classroom management and grading.
Yep.
And, creating lesson plans.
Making busy work.
It's a lot of administrative stuff. It is not actually, a lot of the time hands-on teaching.
Right.
So I don't think it is a requirement at all that you have to be a formally trained educator to be able to educate your own children. If you have a high school diploma, you can do it. You just need to be able to find resources, and there's so many resources out there.
Yeah, I know that it's so much, every year it gets better and better. There are a lot of national organizations. You can get curriculum, you can find lesson plans, and oh my goodness, there's so much stuff online now. It's like, I remember using Khan Academy to help the kids with some stuff they were doing, I think for calculus or trig or whatever it was. And it's been decades since I've had to do that. So I'm like, let's pull up Khan Academy. And they had amazing stuff to teach physics and all kinds of stuff. So it's such a wonderful resource that I think is available for folks now. Just go online, find these organizations, find ways to do it. And like Nicole said, it's not like you're stuck. Maybe you try this for a year or a semester and you're like, this just isn't working for us for one reason or another. Okay. Put your kid back in public school or a private school. And that's not always available to everybody. I have some friends, people are like, well, what about private schools? It's like, yeah. Do you have $50,000 per kid per year to spend? I know somebody who's spending $150,000 a year on private school. That is out of reach for almost everyone I know around here. It's like, that's outrageously expensive. So it's not like the private school is necessarily stupendous. And like, oh my goodness.
I mean, they still have some of the same problems.
They sure do. Just because it's a private school doesn't mean all the kids are at the same level. And that's not going to happen. Let's see. So another thing is, I see this too. This is a very common myth. If you homeschool your kids, they're going to really have a hard time getting accepted at college later. They're not going to be able to get into college, so they're doomed.
Sure. I mean, that myth I can address in a couple of ways. One, anecdotally, that is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
Because I know, any of the homeschoolers that I know that wanted to go to college, and that would be most of them, not all, but most, were able to get into the college.
Very good schools.
That they wanted to get into. But also, there's a ton of research about this. This is not just me saying, oh yeah, I know, so-and-so, and they did fine. There's research that homeschoolers actually do better in college. I mean, they don't know exactly why that is, but I mean, there is some thought that homeschoolers are often used to making their own schedules, that they have something that they want to get done and they figure out how to get that done in their days. They're able to schedule their own time. They're able to work independently. Things that are required in college to a greater extent than it is in high school. So homeschoolers are very successful in college. Colleges know that and are happy to welcome them in.
Yeah. Yeah. So every single one of our kids has a college degree, right? And one went on to get a master's. And now another one's saying, I think I'm going to get a master's. And they've done really well in California universities, some of the top universities. And like I said, graduated early from a California university. So yeah, they did well, because I think they didn't hate learning. They didn't have a negative impression of school and education. It was a really positive impression. So they were able to take it pretty seriously, and they know how to, schedule their time. They know how to learn. They know how to kind of motivate themselves. And we talk with them and help them. There are times, but yeah, so that's definitely, there's research that proves this. Homeschool kids do not struggle getting into college, not at all. And then the final one, which I think is interesting, that the artificial environment of homeschooling is going to have kind of a negative impact on people being able to adapt to the real world, quote, later. That they're not going to be ready for the real world because they haven't been in a public school and went to the school of hard knocks or whatever they're thinking this might be.
Well, I mean, that one's fairly simple. I mean, homeschoolers, and I can't speak for all homeschoolers. There
Sure.
are homeschoolers that lead very different lives than we led.
Yeah.
And that were very isolationists, or what I would call non-schoolers. They just kept their kids out of school, but they did not educate them. That is not what I'm talking about. But the type of homeschooling that we did, and that all of the people that I know did, is much more real world focused and grounded than sending your kids off to a structured place where they move classroom to classroom, with a certain amount of time. That's not how real life is. So, I mean, it's very easy with homeschooling to expose kids to real life, to, shopping and meal prep and, helping your neighbor. We're going to skip what we were going to do this math lesson today and, help this neighbor because they need something. Right. I mean, that's real world. And I think they are very adapted to real world living.
Yeah.
It's a non-issue.
Yeah, it's funny because I have seen a backlash about the education people receive. And they said, I never learned how to pay bills. I never learned how to do my taxes. I never learned how to be an entrepreneur. I never learned any of this stuff. And that's true. I know I didn't either. But our kids were exposed to that. They saw me doing taxes every year. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur since 2010. So my kids saw that. And I talk about my business, and I talk about revenue, and I talk about marketing and sales, things I wish I'd learned when I was younger. And so they've seen this, and they learned, oh my gosh, they learned so much about software and computers, because that's my background. I used to be a software designer. So they saw that from a very young age and learned a lot about it. So yeah, it's interesting to think that they're not ready for the real world, because I think, if anything, they spent so much time in the real world. They did not just sit in a room all day long in a classroom. They went with you to Santa Cruz. They were in the forest. They were downtown. They were wherever. And as you mentioned earlier, a big part of being in the real world is learning how to interact with all kinds of people. You're not going to just interact with people who are your age. I don't know any of you who go to work and you spend the entire day working with everybody who's your exact age. It's not like that. And so our kids really are comfortable speaking to adults, and that was from a young age. They had a wide range of ages of the kids that they were, going to school with and doing things with. And so to them, people are people. It's not like they have this cohort of, I only hang out with other 25-year-olds. They have friends of all ages. They're still friends with some of those people.
Lives so much richer.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the educators that we had outside the classroom is doing a grand tour. Was going through Canada, going up to Alaska, and he stopped in to visit our kids. They still have a connection. They still talk. I think that's amazing. And I certainly don't talk with any of my teachers from when I was in high school. They don't come visit me. I don't know. It was such a magical experience that I'm really surprised that people just don't understand it. It's a real shame. So that's about it. I'm going to share some resources so that you can read more, some of these homeschooling organizations and kind of check into it. If you go to newsletter.invinciblelife.me, this is issue 98, Busting Some Homeschooling Myths. So I'll have some links up there. Thanks for joining me, Nicole.
You're very welcome.
Until next time, I wish you the best of luck with pursuing the life of your dreams so you can be happier, healthier, and more fulfilled.